Identity Stewardship, a proposed framework for reconciling privacy, accountability, and technological capability. Introduction. One of the most significant legal and ethical challenges of the 21st century concerns the relationship between identity, surveillance, accountability, and personal liberty. Historically, the ability to identify individuals was limited by practical constraints. Observation was generally local, temporary, and difficult to preserve. A person seen in one location was unlikely to be continuously tracked, profiled, or monitored throughout their lifetime. Technological limitations naturally imposed boundaries on the collection and dissemination of personal information. Contemporary technology has substantially altered these conditions. Artificial intelligence, facial recognition systems, behavioral analytics, geolocation tracking, biometric databases, and mass digital storage have created unprecedented capacities for identifying, monitoring, and profiling individuals. Actions that were once fleeting may now become permanent records. Identities that were once difficult to discover may now be revealed almost instantly. These developments raise a fundamental question. How can a society preserve accountability while preventing identification systems from becoming mechanisms of domination, exclusion, surveillance, or coercion? The principle of identity stewardship represents one proposed answer to this question. The central thesis. Identity stewardship begins from a distinction that many contemporary legal systems fail to adequately recognize. Observation, recording, identification, disclosure, publication, and distribution are not equivalent actions. A person being visible in public does not necessarily imply that their identity should be discoverable by anyone, at any time, for any purpose. Likewise, the ability to record events for accountability does not automatically imply the right to publicly disclose the identities of all persons captured within those recordings. Identity stewardship therefore proposes that identity information should be treated as a distinct category of protected information requiring its own rules of access, disclosure, and stewardship. Identity as a sovereign personal asset. The framework begins with the concept of identity sovereignty. Identity sovereignty holds that individuals possess primary authority over the disclosure of information that uniquely identifies them. This includes, but is not limited to, facial characteristics, biometric information, personal identifiers, behavioral profiles, location histories, associated identifying data. Importantly, identity sovereignty does not imply immunity from accountability. Rather, it establishes a presumption that identity disclosure requires justification. Under this framework, the default question is not, why should identity be concealed? But rather, why should identity be disclosed? The burden of justification shifts toward disclosure rather than concealment. Accountability without universal identification. A common objection immediately arises. If individuals possess strong control over identity disclosure, how can accountability be maintained? Identity stewardship responds by distinguishing between accountability, identification. Many contemporary institutions treat these concepts as inseparable. Identity stewardship argues that they can be separated. Accountability requires that actions be traceable when legitimate disputes arise. It does not necessarily require that identities be continuously visible or publicly accessible. A person may remain accountable without being universally identifiable. This distinction becomes increasingly important as technological capabilities expand. Universal recording rights. Within this framework, recording serves an important social function. Recordings preserve evidence. Evidence facilitates dispute resolution. Dispute resolution supports accountability. Consequently, the framework generally supports broad recording rights. However, recording rights do not automatically create unrestricted publication rights. The existence of evidence and the public dissemination of identity are separate questions. The ability to preserve information does not necessarily imply the right to disclose all identifying information contained within that information. The principle of identity stewardship. Identity stewardship extends beyond ownership and focuses on responsibility. Any individual, institution, corporation, platform, or government entity that acquires identifying information becomes a steward of that information. Stewardship creates obligations. The steward is not granted unrestricted authority over the information. Rather, the steward assumes responsibilities regarding storage, protection, access, disclosure, retention, transfer. The concept parallels fiduciary responsibility in finance. Possession of information does not imply ownership of the person from whom the information originated. Identity, non-commodification. One implication of identity stewardship is the rejection of identity as a commodity. Many contemporary economic models rely heavily upon the collection, aggregation, and sale of personal information. Identity becomes a product. Behavior becomes inventory. Individuals become sources of extractable value. Identity, non-commodification, challenges this model. The principle asserts that identity information should not be bought, sold, traded, harvested, or exploited absent informed authorization or legitimate legal justification. This principle seeks to prevent identity from becoming a market asset controlled by third parties rather than by the individual to whom the identity belongs. Least identity exposure. Another foundational principle is that only the minimum amount of identifying information necessary to accomplish a legitimate purpose should be disclosed. This concept resembles principles already found within information security and data minimization practices. For example, verifying age does not require revealing unrelated personal information. Verifying professional credentials does not require revealing complete personal histories. Verifying authorization does not require unrestricted disclosure of identity. The objective is proportionality between the information requested and the purpose being served. Purpose-bound access. Identity stewardship also proposes that information collected for one purpose should not automatically become available for unrelated purposes. This concept may be described as purpose-bound access. For example, a bank may require identity verification to establish an account. That verification does not automatically justify the sale of identity information to advertisers. A retailer may verify a transaction. That verification does not automatically justify the creation of permanent behavioral profiles. The legitimacy of information collection derives from its purpose. When the purpose changes, additional justification becomes necessary. Escrowed accountability. One of the more innovative aspects of the framework is the concept of escrowed accountability. Traditional systems often assume a binary choice. Either information is hidden, or information is publicly accessible. Identity stewardship proposes a third alternative. Information may be preserved without becoming publicly available. Evidence may exist. Recordings may exist. Identity information may exist. Yet access remains restricted unless specific procedures are satisfied. This allows accountability mechanisms to function while reducing the risks associated with unnecessary disclosure. Escrow, therefore, serves as a mechanism for reconciling competing interests that are often treated as mutually exclusive. Decentralized oversight. The framework further recognizes that centralized authority over identity information creates opportunities for abuse. Concentrated informational power may lead to political abuse, economic abuse, social exclusion, discrimination, arbitrary surveillance. Consequently, identity stewardship favors decentralized oversight mechanisms. Decentralization is intended to reduce the probability that any single institution can exercise unchecked control over identity disclosure decisions. The objective is not the elimination of authority, but the distribution of authority in ways that increase transparency and accountability. Information as a mechanism of power. A broader theoretical insight emerges from this framework. Information itself can become a form of power. When aggregated and weaponized, information may influence employment opportunities, access to services, reputation, freedom of movement, social participation. In extreme cases, information systems may function as informal punishment systems independent of formal legal processes. Identity stewardship seeks to prevent information from becoming an instrument of domination. The concern is not merely privacy. The concern is the concentration of power that identity information can produce. Rehabilitation and permanent exclusion. The framework also raises questions regarding rehabilitation. Modern information systems increasingly allow past conduct to follow individuals indefinitely. Facial recognition systems, shared databases, and behavioral profiles may continue imposing consequences long after formal penalties have concluded. This creates tension between rehabilitation and perpetual exclusion. If society genuinely intends rehabilitation to be possible, information systems must be designed in ways that allow individuals to move beyond prior misconduct after accountability requirements have been satisfied. Identity stewardship therefore places limits on how identity information may be retained, shared, and repurposed. Conclusion. Identity stewardship represents an attempt to address a challenge unique to the technological age. As identification systems become more powerful, societies face increasing pressure to choose between freedom and accountability. This framework rejects that dichotomy. It proposes that accountability and liberty need not be opposing values. Instead, accountability can be preserved through evidence, verification, and carefully controlled access mechanisms, while identity disclosure remains limited to circumstances in which it is genuinely justified. The ultimate objective is neither anonymity nor surveillance. Rather, it is the creation of a legal framework in which individuals remain sovereign over their identities while continuing to operate within systems capable of maintaining accountability, resolving disputes, and protecting rights. In this sense, identity stewardship may be understood as an attempt to redefine the relationship between personhood, information, and power in an era increasingly shaped by advanced technologies.